So thank you very much. I want to thank you, Jennifer Robertson, and the Center for Japanese Studies for having me here today, and for all of you for coming and attending. My name is Erica Friedman, and 20 years ago, I noticed something very interesting. This is very loud. Let's see if I can move this a little bit, because it's like super loud. Okay, is it all right for you? All right, so 20 years ago, I noticed something very interesting to me, that in anime and manga, all the lesbian characters were so much cooler and more competent and more interesting than every other character around them. And I thought, I can't be the only one who's noticed this thing, right? So I was on Usenet at the time, and I was talking to some other fans of anime and manga, and we all said, hey, you know, the lesbian characters are really cool. And a friend of mine wrote a fanfic called Scenes from an Elevator. And in that extended and went on for years, Scenes from an Elevator, the characters decided that the animated lesbians would do a convention, Ani Lesbo Con. And that was where I got my idea. So we took that name, we ran with it, and nearly 20 years later, here I am to speak with you today about my lifetime obsession and how we got from there to here. So. Why is it going back? It's going the wrong way. Sorry. Let's go back to the beginning. Oh, yeah. Go down. What? Sorry, I'm doing this weirdly. Okay. So, to begin with, I'm going to start with our vocabulary so that we all are talking the same language, as it were. Our vocabulary today is about 4 or 5 different things that have different names, and the names have changed over time, so you're going to maybe know different words for the same things. This is why I want to sort of establish what we're talking about. When I say boys love, I'm talking about a genre that is primarily written by women for women. And there are established magazines, established tropes. You may also know it as yaoi, you may know it as june, you may know it as 801, but the current industry category is boys love. We'll be talking about yuri, which is lesbian-themed animation and comics. We're going to talk about bara, which means rose. So yuri is lily, bara is rose. In the 70s, a gay man named Eito Bunkaku was running a Japanese magazine for gay men called Barazoku. And it meant the Rose Tribe. And he was identifying gay men as the Rose Tribe, and in it was a few pages. The Yuri Zoku no Heya, the room for the Lily Tribe. And it was letters by lesbians to other lesbians. So from that period of time, bara was associated with sort of willowy, beautiful gay boys, and yuri is associated with lesbians. But these days, bara is sort of not really used all that much in Japan, although it's used a lot here in America for sort of bear comics by gay men, big chunky men, drawing comics for other chunky men. In Japan, they tend to just call them gay comics. And then we're going to talk about LGBTQ comics, which are also, it's comics by LGBTQ people, for LGBTQ people, pretty much worldwide. So these are the terms I'm going to be using going forward so you kind of understand where we are. Okay. What? Oh, it's okay. So the Dark Ages. Before the internet, we were stuck with Japanimation. Japanimation was a generic term for anything coming out of Japan. If you were growing up at the time, you were watching things like Star Blazers, you were watching Speed Racer, and all of this was lumped under Japanimation. And you had a lot of very science fiction-y kind of things. This was a sort of a rebooted, here's a bunch of different anime. Japanimation things that I found somewhere on the internet. It doesn't really matter where. But this was the sort of thing that you had. It was all lumped. And it tended to be a small niche of science fiction fandom. And in fact, not only was it a small niche of science fiction fandom, it was a small niche that science fiction fandom did not like. They rejected it pretty much fully. They tended to avoid any of the sections or allow Japanimation sections. Comic stores occasionally got like an art book, and it was like $100 because it had flown over first class. But nobody wanted to buy it. So this was the Dark Ages. And in the middle of the Dark Ages, colleges and high schools started developing clubs where you had media geeks, and they'd get together and get laser discs from Japan, and they would sit around huddling in a small closet-sized room and talk about this stuff. And there's tech and room and time, and when they got together, there was money. And so these clubs started forming where you'd get these Japanimation clubs. In fact, Rutgers, my alma mater, has one of the oldest ongoing anime manga clubs in the country, I believe. The Ota King himself created it. So out of these, you got things like fanzines and fanfic and anime music videos and cosplay in America as opposed to the sci-fi masquerades. And then you started getting fan subtitling of anime, fan subs, and fan dubbing, right, which still is awkward even to this day. You know, there's every once in a while there's one that's good, but most of them are really just kind of not. So what happened is you mostly had young men who were the tech guys. These was really, it was the nerdy dudes, right? They were all sitting in the room, and they were watching, you know, occasionally they'd watch a hentai, sort of porn. And so you got it was a very, like in so many things that are in the nerdy space, the presumption was that it was for straight men, right? The presumption is always, by straight men, it's always for straight men, right? Even if other people are interested, they're sort of othered, right? So you'd have the occasional one girl who would sit there, and at this point in the Dark Ages, LGBTQ people and concepts are sort of othered, even though in Japan itself, there is already gay comics, there are already queer creators, and there's an underculture of self-published stuff that explores all sorts of concepts. But here in America, those were pretty much wholly unrelated to anime fandom. And then the internet. So the internet changed everything. It was the first time that you could go out in the world and find a community of intention, of people who liked this weird stuff that you liked, that used the words you used and understood what you were talking about. And when you talked about this fanfic that you liked of Ranma 1/2, and it was really cool because Ranma, who is a boy, but when he gets hit by hot water, I think it is, he turns into a girl. And when he gets hit by cold water, he turns into back into a boy. And it's a very goofy, funny series. It's inconsequential, except it was incredibly consequential because it was one of the first gender switch things ever to come to America. And you were talking about that fanfic that made you feel when he was sort of talking about his feelings. And all of a sudden on the internet, no one made fun of you for having that discussion or writing that fanfic or drawing that art. And so this changed everything. And at this point, on groups, on Usenet, in chat rooms, conversations were happening where people who had never had words to talk about themselves found representation in something that was never meant to represent anything. I mean, his father is a panda. So this is not a series that's meant to be taken seriously. But what happens is people do, right? So you see the scenes where girl Ranma is angry at something that happened to her, or she's standing there without a shirt because, of course, she's really a boy and doesn't really understand the rules about that, and we're supposed to find that amusing. And yet, people are reading it and feeling completely other things about freedom, about their gender, about other people's gender, about this understanding that maybe inside you truly are like Shampoo a cat, or something else, or like Ryoga, you're a weird little tiger dude. I mean, the bottom line is that it's a comedy. It's a very silly comedy. It's a lot of slapstick, and yet people were finding other stories to tell about it. And this continued in the early days of the internet. So then we had, in America, we had a manga boom. So Ranma, Tenchi, anime lead to some more things. Manga starts showing up. And then a guy named Stu Levy created Tokyo Pop. And Tokyo Pop revolutionized manga because they standardized the size, they standardized the cost, they standardized the way things were done. And all of a sudden, you could find manga in a store. And that was partially because of Stu and partially because of a guy named Kurt Hassler, who opened up, who was working for Borders. And Borders saw an opportunity that Barnes & Noble wasn't taking. Big chain stores were moving into large spaces at malls, and they were getting more people, and they were getting a lot of young people. They were taking up spaces that the libraries might have, or smaller bookstores might have. And so they saw an opportunity. So in this manga boom, something interesting happened. And what happened was these companies started finding requests. Why isn't it working? Yeah, here we go. Started finding requests for manga that told different stories. And generally speaking, there was a lot more sexuality in manga than there ever was in comics. Now, comics, I'm afraid that we're on a timer now. Comics, at this point, had kind of stagnated. We're in the 90s, and you had characters where you constantly, we're doing this still today, you're getting their origin stories over and over and over and over and over, and they don't kind of ever move on, they don't really develop. But what happened is you got things like Kaoruyuki's Angel Sanctuary, where you have beings that are not human, and so the sexuality is very non-defined. You've got these things where, are they asexual or pansexual or heterosexual or homosexual, and they're all kind of sleeping with each other. You got CPM doing Kizuna, which was a early, very, very popular boys' love story. And the creator of Kizuna came to New York and did an interview at the Japan Society. And I was able to ask her a question that I'd been dying. Kizuna is about guys in the Yakuza, right? So the Japanese criminal world. And I said, why Yakuza? Why, right? And she said something that I was totally blown away by. She said, because I went to school with a guy who was a son of a Yakuza, and I thought it would be really cool. And I was like, wow, that's unexpected, because I thought she was going to say something like, well, it's a man's world, and they idolize masculinity. No, she went to school with a guy. I was just so happy with that answer. So then you get something like You're in My Secret, and that's another gender switch story. It's a body switch story, which they do a lot to sort of explore gender, and it's really not very good, and it's very banal. It's the kind of thing where you have 3 pages of the guy going, oh, I have to keep my skirt down, but don't talk about anything like real, like menstruation. It's like it's not funny, but it's supposed to be funny, and it's really painful. Then you get like Azumanga Daioh, where you have a character, girl, who is in love with another girl who's very cool. She idolizes her. There's no real connection between them. It's the word in Japanese is akogare, which is sort of a admiration that can sort of get to a line of desire, but doesn't really generally cross it. So you get stories like that from the main publishers. You get Tokyo Pop and CPM and Viz and well, now it's Yen, but it was ADV at the time. So you've got these stories that are sort of have these spaces where people can have conversations that you wouldn't have at the dinner table. They can have these spaces where they can have conversations about maybe things that they thought or felt or wanted to talk about. And then, at the end of this first boom, I don't know why, you got even more niche publishers. So you got Drama Queen and my company, ALC, and Lesbicon Publishing. So these two companies were building up in the early 2000s. And what they were doing was they were trying to say, you know, there's more space than you think there is. There's more stuff that's gayer than you think it is. It's not always just like hints. Sometimes the characters are just women who are lesbians, and sometimes the characters are just men who are gay. And so Tran is the publisher of Drama Queen, and I got together and we were trying to promote a gayer kind of manga. And so we were talking directly to the creators who were more fringy and less mainstream, and we were trying to present that. And when we started doing this, the conversations on the internet started to change. And so I created Lesbicon and Yuricon to give space to the place where you can go, let's talk about Juri in Revolutionary Girl Utena. Let's talk about how Shiori broke her heart. Let's talk about what that conversation needs to be about my life and Juri's life and Shiori falling in love with a straight girl, falling in love with a manipulative girl, falling in love with somebody who does not love you and maybe even hates you. Let's talk about these conversations. And so we gave spaces to this by having these out there. Then we had a bust. So after the first Manga Bust, everything went just black. I mean, there was just nothing because we couldn't sell it because there was a recession and Borders went out of business and there was just this sort of black space. But then something else happened. We have a whole new landscape starts developing. And the bookstores start picking up again. And the publishers shook themselves out and said, we can do this, but better than we did. And what happened at that time was the mainstream publishers had a conversation with themselves about what do fans want in these intervening stages. Between the boom and the bust, the conversations on the internet never stopped. You had conventions like Yuricon, you had conventions like Yaoicon, things like BentCon, and just all these little areas where people had never had these conversations before and had spaces to sell their books and tell their stories. Those aren't going back in the closet. Once you let those things out, they never go back in. So while the bookstores are trying to figure out what they're going to sell, everybody is having these conversations in their own spaces. And those conversations have never stopped. And it's fascinating to me how they've changed over time because back in Usenet days, you had a conversation among fans of Boys Love, which we now call Boys Love, but at the time was called mostly yaoi. It was a bunch of American fans who felt that there needed to be a distinction between comics with explicit sex and comics that had sort of more romance than sex. And because of that, they created new words for themselves. So you may have heard of words like shoujo-ai or shonen-ai. In Japan, those were used for things that pedophiles like, girls love and boy love. But the American fans didn't know, and so they were calling them. And I was part of that scene, and I understood that, and I understood that need, although I didn't agree with it. So shoujo-ai and shonen-ai became the cute, romantic relationships between girls or between boys. And then you had yaoi, which was explicit, and yuri, which was explicit, was not true. At that time, yuri was typically, in Japan, was explicit. Yaoi often was explicit, but what you didn't have was a distinction in Japan. They would put the stories right next to each other in the same magazine. There was no sense of this was for younger people. You know, there's no PG-13. There was only yaoi and yuri. What happens is once we all realized that was the wrong way to go around it, we started changing the way we wanted things. And we started talking about yuri being anything for lesbians and BL being about men and relationships. So what happened was, meanwhile, while here in America we had like empty shelves and only conversations and we're trying to figure out what we're doing, in the meantime, in Japan, several things happened. the sales of Boys Love flattened out. They've never really gone down, but they did flatten out because you get to a certain amount of saturation of anything, and it just sort of flattens out. In 2003, a magazine called Yurishimai was published, which was an all-Yuri magazine. In 2005, it went out of business. Its properties were purchased by a different publisher. And after that, it was relaunched as Yurihime, and Yurihime still exists. Comic Yurihime is still a magazine. It's now a monthly magazine. It started quarterly, then went bi-monthly, and now it's monthly. So it's still successful. So we got the slow growth of Yuri, and when I kind of joke a little bit that, you know, that yaoi sort of peaked and then went flaccid, and that Yuri sort of is like in waves, you know. So then what happens is also, because you have gay comics being born, you have bara here in America, you have gay comics in Japan, you have lesbian comics in Japan. And what happens is these things build up over time. Once you let somebody out of the closet, once somebody decides to be out of the closet, you can't shove them back in. You have gay communities who want to tell their stories. Once they start telling their stories, they're not going to say, we're going to stop to make you less uncomfortable, right? That has never happened. So what happens is you get more magazines. This is a typical BL. I picked this one, the BL magazine, because it's called Drep and has no meaning. I like it very much. Comic Yurihime was just relaunched for the 4th time, so now it's a monthly magazine. You've got something like G-Man, which has what we would call bara, what they just would call gay magazines. And then you have something like what I call the 5th column in Comic Erotics F, is a comic magazine for anybody who wants to read manga. So there's comics by women, comics by men, next to comics for women and for men. They're all mixed up. There's no differentiation between who wants it. And this particular one is the final chapter of a very classic, it was sort of like a remade classic Yuri manga called Aoi Hana, Sweet Blue Flowers, which is coming out this year in English from Viz. And I'll be saying that sort of thing a lot, like it's coming out because all of it's coming out this year. So Sweet Blue Flowers sort of reimagined some of the classic Yuri tropes into a new story. And here it is in the magazine for neither men nor women, just whoever feels like reading it. And that's what I call the 5th column. So what you have is this weird growth of fringiness that's not really fringe, because these magazines are in the bookstore shelves, they're the manga store shelves, right next to all the other manga. There's no differentiation. You don't have to go to a gay bookstore to find them. You just go to a manga store to find them. Here in America, the fringe became mainstream. So you have fans. The publishers all died, right? CPM went out of business. ADV goes out of business. All the small ones go out of business. Drama Queen and ALC, they all just stop publishing. But the fans don't stop asking. So they start writing the bigger companies. They say, hey, can we get this stuff that we want to read? And we know it's out there. We know that there are people publishing in Japan because we've seen it. So you've got DPM comes up and they say, we will publish yaoi manga. So they put out a line. Or Viz with their line of BL Sublime. You get stuff like Seven Seas put out Girlfriends by Morinaga Milk. And Drawn Quarterly, I believe, had put out Wandering Sun in a hardcover format, which is a story about trans tweens. It's an extraordinary story. It's really lovely. So you're getting these comics where gay stories are being told for the audience that wants to read them. And it's all very exciting and new. And then you're getting things like Tagame Gengoro Massive gets put out in English, and this is explicit, I mean really explicit, hardcore gay comics by a gay man for a gay male audience in English from a company called Gay Manga. Right, so there's no ambiguity. It's not like, well, there's kind of this, but no, this is really clearly gay. And Tagame Sensei also does this story called Ototo no Oto, which means my brother's husband. And it's coming out in English this year as well. And if you read no other manga ever in the history of your life, read this manga. It is about a man who is Canadian, this gentleman here, who had married a Japanese man in Canada, and that man died. And now he is going to Japan to try to recapture his husband's life in Japan. And he meets his husband's brother, who is passively, averagely homophobic. Like, gay is okay, but over there and not in my face, and I don't want to really think about it. And he never really dealt with the fact that his brother was gay, and he hasn't really ever, he's never told his daughter, this is his daughter, never told his daughter that she had an uncle at all, because he'd moved to Canada and married a man. So it's an extraordinary book. I've been reading it in Japanese. It's very moving and very honest, and it does something different because it's a mainstream comic. This is not a fringe publisher. This runs in a magazine for men, for men's manga. So it's the kind of thing that a salaryman might pick up and read at the end of the day, standing there in the store. It's something that he might read, and it's very honest about the gayness of it. And it has terms. It explains things like why a pride parade, which seems to be a thing that is incomprehensible to a lot of people. It explains things like what do the terms even mean, things that we might take for granted. And so it is an explicitly manga about gay life, and it does deal with issues of coming out, of being closeted in Japanese life. It's exceptionally moving. I've read the first 3 volumes, and when it comes out, I recommend this with all my recommends. Right? So this stuff is becoming much more mainstream, both here and in Japan. And then something new happened in the last few years. Comic essays, right? So a few years ago, there was this couple. They were both activists. One was a former Takurisian performer, and they wanted to get married, and they called up Disneyland in Tokyo and said, please let us get married there in Tokyo. Disneyland said, only if one of you wears a tux, so that people going by won't know it's 2 women. And so they were very upset, and they called America Disney, and Disney called up Tokyo and said, that's not the way we do this. Right? It's because Disney is a very, very pro-LGBTQ company. And so they explained very patiently that no. So then Tokyo Disneyland said, okay, how are we doing this? And they went through the whole thing, and they did a very big ceremony at which a friend of mine actually was in attendance. And he said it was beautiful. I have some pictures that he shared. And so this is a comic about that experience and about them talking to their families about it and how their families dealt with it, and like real life consequences, the kind of thing that in manga you rarely actually see. In Girlfriends, you've got like 3 pages at the end of 5 volumes where I guess we're going to have to deal with this as we go forward, but we'll be okay, you know. It's, you have a comic about somebody I know, Fujimi Shion-san. She and her wife wanted to have a baby. Of course, they're not married. They have no protections. They have no legal rights. And they wanted to get married and have a child. So this is a comic about getting pregnant and having a child as a lesbian couple. And then you have my roommate is a beautiful lesbian, which is about by a straight woman whose roommate is a beautiful lesbian. She's a lesbian personality, TV, activist. And so it's just about like a straight woman writer's perspective of what her roommate's life is like meeting, you know, that woman's wife, because she got married in France. So she's actually married. So it's sort of an interesting thing. You get these comic essays. You've got things like Nakamura Kyo has a lovely comic essay about being the stepmother to her lover's children. Like, so you're getting comic essays in this is a completely different new thing where they're talking about life and love and family and rights. So it's a whole new world. And really, comic essays to me are sort of like the future of where we're going with all this. Okay, so now we're doing a little interpretive dance. This is an image from a brand new anime called Yuri on Ice. It has nothing to do with my Yuri. His name is Yuri. And it's a very BL-friendly cartoon. If you like BL, I recommend it because people were really going crazy over it. So we're going to do a little interpretation. So this part is going to be on you. I'm going to show a page without context. And what I want from you is to think about what do you think is going on. Now, if you know the page in question, don't answer. Okay, what I want is people who have no clue at all to just kind of make up a story. I want to know what you think is happening. And don't be afraid because there's no right answers because you can't possibly be wrong. This is fiction. You're about to write a fiction. Fanfic it is. So we're going to do a little interpretive dance. Okay. The one guy says to the other, why I'm here to kneel down before you and declare my love for you again. Dot, 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 dot. They do that a lot of ellipses. My love. All right, who wants to tell me what's going on here? What do you think the context of this story is? Come on, someone be brave.
He's trying to freak out the otaku in glasses.
Okay. Okay, try to freak them out. That's good. Anybody else? Yes. I'm sorry? Okay, gay man that's fallen for a straight man. All right, yes.
Maybe the guy in glasses is some famous person, and the manga guy is like the immensely famous.
Okay. Oh, that's good. I like that one. That's awesome. I hadn't thought of that. Anybody else? Yes.
The guy with the glasses is like the guy's bodyguard, and then the guy who's like trying to confess his love is confessing his love to like just a normal, like average man. So the guy's like, huh? Probably.
Okay. Okay. That's good. I like that. Let's do one more. Somebody else come up with something. Yes.
I think it's one of those elaborate, they're pretending something at the beginning and then they're really fall in love. Because guy with glasses seems to be kind of in on it or not surprised by this display of love and affection.
Okay, good.
And the other guy is clearly rather shocked.
Okay, good. So I just want to back up and just say, remember, when you were a fan in the 80s and 90s, you were interpreting everything through your own filter, right? You're looking at what a creator creates, because a creator writes something and they think they've told a story. That's very, very clear. And then you go, I don't think that's what you told at all. I made this other story up in my head. So there's just as an aside, there's an anime called Aria, and it is not Yuri at all. And I decided the two of the characters were madly and passionately in love. And off screen, they were having this torrid love affair. And I watched the whole thing with that filter. Right? It was not Yuri. It was never meant to be Yuri, but I wrote every review as if it were. And I got some really interesting hate mail from that. But so what we're doing here is we're saying, how do we filter this? So every one of you just told me a little bit about yourself, right? I had a very interesting person, a straight man that I know, look at it and say, oh, he's mocking the other man. And I thought, well, that's sort of interesting and manipulative. So the deal is, this is a manga called Antique Bakery. It's by a woman named Yoshinaga Fumi, who writes a lot of BL stuff, but she writes BL stuff about actual gay men, but it's BL manga, but it's about real gay men. And in this case, this gentleman and this gentleman were both lovers previously. And he is literally redeclaring his love, exactly as he says. This is a literal scene, but he's sort of a jerk. And he walked away. He's the baker in Antique Bakery. So he's like this dessert chef. And this is the guy who owns the bakery, and that's his bodyguard. So they had no idea. They know he's gay, but they have no idea about this relationship. So this is all new and exciting. So here's the story where the comic artist is going, well, I'm saying clearly, I'm here to tell you. And yet you read it. And of course, I presented it out of context on purpose to screw you up. But you make your own story up. So let's do this. One more. I love you, Yuki. dot, dot, dot. Okay, Misato, we're ready to begin. Sorry, I'm reading it wrong. This goes with my thoughts. Misato, we're ready to begin. Okay, I love you, Yuki, and they kiss. Suzu, your lines. I'm sorry, I just need a short break. And the guys all go silence. Shin, you know. You manga fans, you know the shin. Right, okay. All right, so what do we think's going on here?
I feel like this is super obvious. They're rehearsing a play,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a scene, and they're supposed to kiss in a scene, and the lady with darker hair has feelings and has to take a moment.
Yes.
I
Yes.
don't know what that says about me.
That seems obvious. All right, anybody else? Anybody else? Do you have any other thoughts that might be? Anybody? Okay, so you are correct. That is exactly what's going on. So again, Misato and Suzu were lovers previously in high school, which is not a real place in the world, right? It's fake. Your relationships in high school do not count. It's sort of like calories eaten standing up. Like, they're just not real, right? They're developmental, and not one of the people I went out with in high school counted, right? But they were in love, and it was a very hard breakup. And here in college, they've gotten back together, and they're in the drama club together, and they're playing this, and horribly for Suzu, who is actually sleeping now with the director here. She does not want to confront these feelings anymore, right? So that's where we are with this. So she's particularly stressed out by this. This was from a collection called Works that I published, and what I like about it is that all 4 of the stories were all like real-life lesbian stories, like things that might have actually happened to a genuine lesbian. And that's the kind of thing that didn't get published until really very recently again. Because it was back in the day, a self-published comic by the artist, she felt free to tell her stories. Okay. So we have 2 characters on the right top, and it looks good on you. Your face says you want to wear it. That's crazy. I'm telling you, I don't want it. You don't? You don't think buying your kid stuff she hates is some kind of harassment? Huh? I don't know. What do you think's going on in this one? This one's a little tough without the context. Yes?
I don't know, but I have this idea from people I know of someone who's identifying with one gender and their parents trying to dress them as the other gender.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead, tell a story. What do you think?
Look to be around the same age, so.
They look to be around the same age.
It's about the buying your kids stuff.
Yep.
So I'm assuming that the character on the left is anatomically female, but performing as a boy,
Okay. Okay.
and somebody's trying to correct that,
Okay.
quote unquote.
Okay. So what it is, this is from Wandering Sun, and it is about 2 trans tweens. The character on the right is actually anatomically female, and she would like to be male. And on the left, the character is anatomically male and would like to be female, and is still having a hard time admitting that they'd prefer to be wearing women's clothes. And Yoshino on the right is saying, look, my mom bought this for me, and I will never wear it. Please take this away from me. So it's a 21-volume manga, 8 volumes of which have been published in English, and they won't get any more because it just didn't sell all that well. But it's got some gay characters as well. It's got an older trans woman who lives with her boyfriend, who is a very effective role model, which I really like. I think that putting an adult role model in a manga for kids is really super critical, because one of the things that happens in the fantasy spaces of school life is you don't ever have characters with anybody who looks at it and goes, oh, look, they're surviving and they're okay and it's okay. And I know as an adult, I've been that role model to young people where people go, oh my God, I see you and your wife and you're happy and you're functional. It can happen. You know, and so this manga actually has this critical perspective of having an adult who has made it work. I love this one. There's no words. Okay, there's that's the only word. Oh, no, good, no, excellent. All right. What do you think's going on here? Someone who wouldn't normally answer. Raise your hand and say, I think. Yes. 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 Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. That's good. Let's get another one. What are the guys? What are the guys? Should tell me what you think. No, just come on. No. Yes.
It looks like it could be a little bit rapey.
A little bit. Yeah. It definitely looks a little rapey, doesn't it? So this is from a classic manga called Heart of Thomas no Shinzo, by Moto Hagio. And it's like a proto-BL. It was before there was really a genre. And she wrote this comic. And it's a famous comic in terms of alternative comics. Because originally, she was writing a comic called November Gymnasium. And she thought about making the characters both females. And the line that's very famous is she thought of them kissing. And she thought it would be slimy. So she decided to make them male. And she was rooming with Takamiya Keiko, who was also a major influence on BL. And the two of them started talking about drawing comics with pretty young men. And they pretty much developed what we think of as BL on their own. In this story, we have this young boy, his name is Eric. He showed up at the school. He looks exactly like a guy who died, named Thomas. And Yuri and Thomas had a very, very fraught relationship. And Thomas, right before he died, had admitted to Yuri that he loved him. So then Thomas went and killed himself. So Yuri has all this guilt and he has all this stress, and he's fallen in love with Eric. This thing that looks like he passed out, this is a really standard trope of I'm not dealing. And you see this a lot in non-consensual scenes in Japanese manga where they just turn their heads. I won't look at you. If you're going to do this, it's not on me. And then he just doesn't, it's defiant. It's defiant. Go ahead. So that's what's going on there. One last one. We're blown away by your smile. I love you too. I've waited so long to say it.
So acting on a crush, and they both have these sort of blushing under the eyes,
Yes.
which suggests heat of passion.
Right.
As a visual kind of
Right. Right.
graphic marker.
Okay. Good. So acting on a crush. Yes. Right. Okay. Right. Right. I don't even remember what the page before said, to be honest. But this is the end of a 5-volume manga called Girlfriends by Morinaga Milk, and that the blushy cheeks is her distinct moe style. So all her characters look like that all the time, which renders the look meaningless. So because everybody's always pink-cheeked and cute. And basically you had an introverted girl and an extroverted girl, and they kind of started to feel something for each other, and they spent 5 volumes working it out, and this is the climax, ta-da. So this is what happens is they say they're in love, and what happens in classic Yuri at that point is end of story. That's it. Bye. done. In this one, there's actually like a 2 or 3 page epilogue where they think about trying to tell people and, we'll deal with it, but it's sort of like, we'll deal with it eventually kind of thing. And so, as Jennifer said, all of my writing, all of our scholarly novels, both by me and other people, are here on Yuricon. Okazu is 15 years old, so there's a lot of content. Feel free to come there and feel free to comment. And now I'll take questions.
Thank you very much. Awesome.
Thank you very much. Yes?
Before I actually ask the question, it's based on wondering if you've seen Your Name yet? The anime that's like breaking all.
Oh, yes, Your Name. No, I have not seen it.
Oh, okay, then the question is kind of mute.
Okay.
Because there's body swapping,
Right.
gender swapping, but it's in the service of a heterosexual
Yes.
relationship, which I thought was interesting, but I wonder what you might have to think about it when you see it.
It's actually a really common trope, I think, in Japanese entertainment. I was in Japan some years ago. It was inconsequential. It was over New Year's for Komiket, and we turned on TV, and there was like one of the morning dramas. They always have these very casual, fun morning dramas, and it literally like 5 seconds into it, we were like, oh, it's a gender swap. Like, it was like so obvious that it's a really, really common trope that they use, although I say the animation from Your Name looks really, really beautiful, but the story kind of put my wife and I off because we were like, oh, that again. So, yes.
I just wanted to bring attention to a show coming up this Friday and Saturday. I'm in the Out Loud Chorus, which is
Excellent.
LGBT and then VHH, hopelessly hetero.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I wear my ally pin. And I'm old, but most of them are younger. Don't judge, oh, it's a bunch of old ladies up there. No, it isn't. And a friend of mine down at the other end knows about it too. And I've been passing around 2 of these, so if you see it, it's for a regular student, it's $12 if you're a full-time student, or a senior citizen, $12, $18 at the door for a regular working person, and you won't be disappointed, you won't be bored. I can guarantee you it's a Washtenaw Community College.
Thank you.
It's called Come On In, Come On Out. That's what
Okay.
it's on.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So while you're all here, yesterday I spent some time at the UMA, and I want to say there's a really, really fantastic exhibit of kabuki art posters. So I had briefly mentioned about fanfic, where there's art posters of famous kabuki actors as other things, either as other roles that they never played, or as famous people from the past, or even flowers allegorically. And so fanfic is a very real, this kind of idea of interpretation is ancient and constant. Also, there was a couple other things there. There's discussion of how the onagata of kabuki, the men who played female roles, how they actually managed over time to define female fashion and masculine fashion, very much like we watch our movie stars and music stars, and we define femininity, masculinity by how they present it. It's no different. Also, there was a really cool little exhibit. In the corner, there's a screen, and they're showing various well-known kabuki scenes. And right next to it was an image of a shirabyoshi, which was a woman in the Heian period who was dancing as a man. So much like the Takarazuka Otokuyaku, the women who play male roles, and on the onagata, men who play female roles, you had a shirabyoshi, who was a woman dancing as a man, and they actually had some of it on the screen, and right next to the screen is an image of one of the famous male kabuki players playing a shirabyoshi. So it's a man playing a woman who plays a man. All right, so if you wonder why Japan does this gender swapping, body switching, it has very, very ancient roots. Heian period is 11th century, so we're talking a long, long history of constantly switching bodies and genders. Yeah. Anything else? Yes, let's do you, and then I'll grab you.
This might be kind of a broader, a little vague of a question, but do you think with the more kind of comic essays and maybe more realistic depictions of queer experiences or identities in Japan, does it show something about general attitudes in society, Japanese society?
This is a really tough question in any society. It's like, which comes first, the representation or the need for representation? So it constantly, it's always doing this. Like in American society, if you had to ask me what was the thing that changed the presumptions about gay people, I'm going to tell you it was Will and Grace, which was a comedy and not very interesting but snarky and funny. But it was the first time a lot of straight people in America had ever seen or knew to be gay person, you know, like they knew it was a gay person, and they were like, oh, look, they just want to have a life and a date, and like it never occurred to them that they weren't, you know, that gay people aren't having like actual horrible satanic orgies on the street, which is what a lot of people actually think happens. Although I have yet to be invited to one of those, so it's really odd. So the need for representation usually precedes representation, and representation can affect attitudes, but when I look at the anime and manga world, not the general world of Japan, but just the anime and manga world, I see people who are generally fairly conservative. The guys still sort of have a belief that lesbianism is a thing you do in school, and then you grow up and you get married and you have children. But the fujoshi, the women who like boys love, they're actually, and I think not surprisingly, they're sort of getting a little less visibly homophobic. So you get, here in America, when I started Yuricon, I would literally have American fujoshi welcome and go, ew, Yuri. Because real homosexuality that infected women skeeved them. Like, boys are over there, it's all unrelated, so we can watch them have sex, it's not us. But real lesbians really gross them out. I'm seeing almost none of that anymore. It seems to have just passed, which is I'm very glad for. But in Japan, you get that same sort of thing where originally the fujoshis were all about the fetishization of male homosexuality, and now you're starting to see some broader understanding of actual political and social issues. There are a number of well-known trans talents on TV. That has made some difference, but isn't necessarily translating to acceptance. But when you get entertainment representation, people who never thought of this thing might think of this thing, and once they think of it, they might be, you know, they start thinking of it. It's like a new flavor. It takes you like 19 times to like a new flavor. So the first time you have something weird, you're like, that's pretty gross. And then you have the next one, I don't really like it. But then like the 14th time you had it, like, I like this, it's fine. And that's very normal for us humans. And maybe it's sort of a little similar. So things are changing politically, not as much as you'd hope, but here too. I mean, we, you know, it's progress and digress and regress, you know, and I think it's there too. I think things are slowly changing, but they tend to be less confrontational. But you see something like the Pride Parade. Every year the Pride Parades are getting bigger, and this year there was a lot of controversy because you got a lot of corporate influence. But of course the corporations are standing up and going, we're giving rights to Shiseido, the makeup company, just announced last month that they are now providing domestic partner benefits to their gay employees in Japan, as they do in all their other divisions. That was new and exciting. So that kind of thing does have effect. It's no different from here, where companies were doing that before states, and then states joined, and then eventually, when we got to about 2/3 of American states, the country sort of flipped. I think it's very similar. You're starting to get, in Japan, individual cities and prefectures that are starting to allow same-sex certificates. They have no force of law, but there's some very interesting choices. So 2 of the areas of Tokyo, and I'm really hoping for a 3rd, because I really feel like Toshima Ward really ought to join in there, because Toshima Ward has an out gay representative. So I'm feeling like he really ought to be pushing that. But then you have like an individual ward in Osaka and Takarazuka City, and a ward city in Mia, and so you get these. But does it eventually start building? Yes, it does. So it's all of the same. It's sort of like juggling, Yeah.
I was wondering, when you think about, I guess in modern anime, there's a lot of fan service that's, more erotic, but they're at the end, they're no homo, but then, what do you think about that? Why is it so popular now? I look back at old anime and I'm it's not as extreme as now.
It's always been there. It's always been there. And so I'm going to quote from, there was a production company called B-Train years ago, and I loved their stuff. And one of the series they did was Noir. And Noir had 2 hit women. One was a Japanese person with no memory. The whole amnesia thing, but you're this awesome, amazing person who can do kill 400 people and never get hit by a bullet, that kind of thing. And then this Corsican woman, and the 2 of them have this. They end up fighting a gigantic medieval conspiracy and some other stuff. But it's a great series. It's one of 3 that I call the Girls with Guns on the Run trilogy. So you have Noir, Madlax, and El Cazador de la Bruja. And in Noir, there's a scene towards the end, where Kirika, the Japanese girl, leaves Muriel and leaves a note. And in it she says, "Itoshi Muriel," my beloved Muriel. And they translate it as "Dear Muriel." And when it came out, it was, I don't want to say controversial, but it was massively popular. This was a huge set of conversations on the internet. And we're all talking, does that mean beloved? Or there's layers of understanding? Could it be, that she just felt, really indebted to her? Or does she feel as a family member or whatever? So we were all having these conversations. And of course, eventually somebody asked B-Train because they'd come to Anime Expo or something. And some Americans always ask the uncomfortable questions. The Japanese people go, "This is great, we really liked it." And they go, "Thank you very much." Nobody ever asks any serious questions. The Americans are "Are they gay?" And they said, enragingly for a lot of people, "If you think it's Yuri, it's Yuri." And people went, Americans want specifics. Are they gay? Are they not gay? They're either gay or not. And the answer is, that's not true. The answer is, did you see yes? Did you see no? That's both valid. And then you will both buy the series. That's the answer. The answer is, the more ambiguous, the more people will buy the series. So if you watch Magical Girl Lyrical Nanaha, and for some reason you think she's in love with the ferret instead of Fate, sure, it works. Why you would think she's in love with the ferret, we don't know. He's a mensch, he's just an absolute nebbish. He's a ferret, he's a ferret. But if it makes you comfortable to see her in love with the ferret rather than the other girl, then you're going to buy the series. And if you're like me and you watch it and you go, well, duh. They're clearly in love, Fate and Nana are in love, and then you buy it. The answer is, will you buy it? That's what we want. There's another historical answer, and that is that Japanese writing, literary and historical and artistic precedent is the moment of ambiguities are the best moments. A lot of their writing is about that moment of tension. And then it passes, never to be captured again, and it's gone. So you get a lot of that sort of historical precedent from the literary and artistic traditions where ambiguity is more beautiful than specificity. But Americans, we like specificity. We like it to be they're gay, they're not gay. Anybody else? Yes?
So it seems like both manga and anime are fairly progressive in terms of what issues they do. Do you see a lot of these similar types of things coming out in other mediums, like dramas on TV and movies and that?
So in fact, anime and manga are not particularly progressive, which is sort of interesting. I have, many years I've said this, anime and manga are a space for acting out things that you can't discuss at the dinner table. They are literally fantasy worlds. These are not, you might read a manga and be like, this is me, and never tell anybody. So they're not as progressive as you think. They're fantasy spaces. It's why so much of it takes place in school, because school was then and not real and fake and sort of this weird bubble of your life that we all walk away from and hopefully don't think too much about. You know, when you're my age, you don't go, wow, I remember that day when I was 14. Like, no, I don't. Like, I don't want to think about 14. So there's that. But so this acting out is what they really function as. They function as a space where we can, like art everywhere in the world, like political art, like any sort of art, this is what we do when we have something we want to address, but we have no other way to address it. So we draw comics about it, we paint things on walls, we write songs about it, and those songs tell stories, and sometimes they're not happy stories. But they don't necessarily mean that I do that. So when I write fiction, if I write fiction about an abusive relationship, I will get emails saying, oh, did you live through that? I lived through that. And I go, no, I'm just a good writer. And thank you, but I can't really, like I can't, you know. So if it's good entertainment, it will serve that purpose. And that's true for all things. Japanese dramas are really pretty formulaic. They like their police dramas. They like their doctor dramas. It's not different from American TV. If you go on American TV, you're like, oh, look, it's a doctor drama, it's a cop drama, it's a doctor drama, it's a cop drama. Oh, lawyers. It's very similar, you know, and they have their own tropiness and everything else. I mean, humans are human. Like humans don't change, right? Maybe not quite as tropey as perhaps K-dramas, Korean dramas, which are like have really very specific boxes. But so you don't really see that. But what you do see in entertainment, like broader concept of entertainment, like these talents, which are people who just go from TV show to, like fish, they just go from TV show to TV show. And they have this thing called wide bonds where you have a thing going on over here and people commenting up here, right? Which I can take for like 6 hours and then I just lose my mind, right? And then you have some talents who are trans and some people who are out like Makimura Asako, and they'll go on these shows. And then NHK is surprisingly LGBTQ friendly recently. They have a show called NHK Heart, where they actually discuss gay issues as opposed to, you know, sort of generic, like, ha, look at this funny person as a trans person kind of thing. But I think it ends up changing and moving and changing and moving. And you, like I said, progress, regress, digress. So.
Great, I think we should wrap it up.
Okay.
But thank you so much.
And thank you. Thank you very much for attending. Appreciate it. And for all your great questions.